My name's Marta, and in this Red Gaming Tech video I am here to talk a little bit about VR. Now of course it's been out in the wild for a while now, and while it's been trucking along doing its own thing, it's not really set the world alight just yet. Obviously that comes down to various factors, but I'd say the biggest one is obviously going to be the cost of not only the headset itself, but obviously the machine required to run VR games at a reasonable frame rate, and obviously you need that reasonable frame rate unless you want to, projectile vomit all over your living room. Obviously you've got the PSVR as well, but obviously that is fairly limited in the fact that, well, it's running on a PlayStation 4. And obviously Microsoft have pretty much stayed out of the whole VR thing, and obviously we thought, oh, that's because they're doing this whole AR thing with the HoloLens, and obviously that hasn't really done anything either, because it's not even had rumblings of it coming out in any sort of consumer capacity. I don't think that's really the market they're going for, but it does seem that VR at least is something that's kind of in the back of their minds. As Albert Penello, who I'm sure you are very familiar with, as he's the Senior Director of Product Management and Planning over at Microsoft, spoke with Wired about a fair few things, and of course we'll include a link to their interview in the description below this video. And they basically spoke about how, despite the fact that they do have some mixed reality stuff going on that we've already discussed in the past, they haven't really pushed this technology onto, say, the Xbox One X or the Windows 10 or anything like that. They haven't tried to counter any of the big players in the VR space right now. And he said, quote, "There's still a ton of experimentation in VR. That's not designed to be a backhanded statement. There are obviously consumer products. Moving the problem into the display of your goggles versus the limits of the TV was a result of some of the challenges, of the 3D TV challenges. But VR has so much potential. Is it a viable consumer product for a certain size of audience? We learned with Kinect and the Wii that just translating a typical game experience to VR is not a winning strategy. It's the oddball VR specific stuff that makes it sing. It wasn't something we wanted to distract developers with this year." So just from his phrasing there, I'm sure you would agree that it sounds like they at least have some sort of plan in mind for virtual reality in the future. And obviously the Xbox One X would be the best platform for it, given that of course that machine's a bit of a beast, especially for the price. But he does have some good points actually. The audience for VR is always going to be a certain size, at least until it becomes more affordable. And even then, of course, it's still going to be X amount, that being X amount of people who have a Xbox One or whatever are going to be even interested in VR in the first place. And then obviously you've got the cost factor, blah, blah, blah. And when you bring it into PC, again, you've got the hardware issues that I already mentioned. So he's not wrong there. I think that is one of the biggest roadblocks to VR taking off. And the tech, while pretty impressive, does need work. But I think his second point is more striking, I guess you could say, because I'm sure a lot of people would just save up the cash if they really wanted to, if there was the games that made them go, oh, I really want to play that. But a lot of games have just been like, hey, here's this thing, but in VR. Like, there hasn't really been a killer app in VR yet. Resident Evil 7 was probably one of the first, and given the movement in that game, that's kind of a coin toss whether or not it's going to make you feel ill, which is not really brilliant. So there's not been super loads of like system sellers, I'd say. There's been some really interesting experiences, really interesting games, but I would say only a few of them have really made use of the VR platform. And obviously we've got some interesting looking games coming out in the next year or so that do look to be a slightly different take. We saw one of them at E3. It was a side-scrolling game, and you do wonder, okay, why is that on a VR? But it kind of makes use of the sort of density of space, I guess you could say, and that's a bit more interesting than, hey, here's just another first-person horror game. Woo, spooky. Like, that's great, and I love my horror games, but I want you to really utilise VR, and I don't think developers have really done that yet. So I don't think Microsoft's wrong to kind of hold off. As Penello pointed out, they've kind of, been bitten by this before, the Kinect, and developers didn't really take an interest in it because they just wanted to make a game for the console. That's it. They didn't really want to also have to worry about the Kinect. So one step at a time, I guess, is the TLDR. But I am definitely intrigued by the fact that they are planning something in the future. And obviously, another thing that's a concern is obviously exclusivity. We've had some discussions about this in the past with obviously the Oculus and the Vive. Certain games are only run on Oculus and blah, blah, blah. And a lot of that comes down to the developer in question not having the time, money, both, capability even, to actually code for both systems, because obviously they both have different tracking. Oculus doesn't actually have the room scale that the Vive does, but Paul recently had a chat with some folks from Kronos, and apparently they are working on something to kind of ease that, an API to basically make anything work on any device. So with any luck, that could actually ease that somewhat, and I think more games being available in general would actually be helpful, I guess. It would be very, very helpful, especially if we get some big hitters on there as well. So, I'm very curious to see what you think. Do you think Microsoft should even touch the VR thing? Are you even interested in VR? Like, how much would it have to come down in price for you to be interested? Like, that's the main thing, honestly, I do think. Anyway, that's me done for this video. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.